Lionel didn't notice the changes in Vito's condition as he was leaving the room. A moment later, Vito slowly opened his eyes and blinked blearily around the room. Where was he? He vaguely remembered his fight with the Sovereign in the desert near Annapolis's military base. The destruction had triggered the sands to shift. They'd both been drawn into the quicksand. That should have been the end, so how was he still alive? He sat up and scanned the room. It looked like some kind of hospital ward. Vindictus must have saved him. He was more beneficial to them alive than dead. Vito jumped out of bed and flexed his hands. There were no problems with his body. Vito had sustained a serious injury during the fight, and Stephen had been confident that he wouldn't be a threat even if he woke up. But what Stephen didn't know is that Vito's martial arts were similar to his own. They both grew stronger after being pushed to the limit. Lionel had been doing his best to save him for several days, so his injuries were almost healed. Vito pushed open the door and left the mansion. He didn't encounter anyone on his way out. He made his way to the main road and looked around. The mansion seemed to be located in a relatively secluded area. There was no one in sight. He walked aimlessly down the empty road for a while until a car sped past him. Vito stretched out his hand, enveloping the car in his inner energy, and pulled it back. He peered into the open window of the driver's seat. Where is this place? The driver was so scared that his face turned pale. He pointed at the city up ahead. We're in Annapolis. Vito let out a laugh. I wasted so much time wandering around. It turns out I'm already in Annapolis. I'll have to continue where I left off. Otherwise, this trip would have been a waste. He motioned for the driver to get out and hijacked the car. He accelerated down the street and disappeared on the highway. When Lionel came back 2 hours later, he realized that Vito was missing. He grew concerned and mobilized his subordinates to search for him. At this time, the Leviathan Unit's leader and the Erudites' students were gathered in front of Stephen's solitary confinement room. There was only an hour left until the extended 3-day deadline. They were waiting for Stephen's answer. When the hour passed, his answer remained the same. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. I dealt with Vito. The Leviathan Unit's leader was infuriated. We've given you so many chances, Stephen. You're the one who didn't take it. You'll be relieved of your responsibilities as the Sovereign. The Erudites' students will take over your position, and the ceremony will be held in 10 days. After careful deliberation, the Leviathan Unit had come to an agreement that appointing only one of the students as the Sovereign wasn't appropriate, because the 4 of them had played a crucial role in resolving the national crisis. They decided to be boldly innovative and appoint all 4 of them as the Sovereign. This arrangement was to everyone's satisfaction. The Leviathan Unit's leader continued. The students' teachers have worked hard to train them, and their talents are undeniable. They will be appointed to an advisor position in the government. The country was shocked when the news came out. The Erudites' students had been popular since their existence was revealed to the public, but the higher-ups hadn't made any official statement because of the uncertainty of the situation. But today, the long-awaited announcement was here. Those who were aware that Stephen was the Sovereign didn't approve of the Leviathan Unit's decision, but they didn't have the authority to speak out against it. With the official announcement, the public once again began to sing praises for the Erudites' students. After the Leviathan Unit and the students left, one of the guards shook his head in pity. Mr. Adams, why did you have to let it go this far? Losing your position wasn't worth it. My position isn't important, Stephen said. Whether it's the commander or the Sovereign, it's a position in name only. I don't care who takes over, but I don't approve of the students. They're lying to the public and misleading the higher-ups. A member of the Leviathan Unit returned. I've been instructed to pass on a message. You will no longer be the Sovereign, but the higher-ups still want to give you a chance. They want to appoint you to Commander-in-Chief again. Kylan will return to his original position as the General of the Army with Sylvie. The 2 guards were happy for Stephen. They encouraged him to thank the Leviathan Unit member for this opportunity. Why should I be thankful? Stephen retorted. I'm not doing this for the sake of reputation. Kylan's the commander, and he deserves the position. It's not mine anymore. Don't you know how to appreciate favors? The Leviathan unit member asked in displeasure. The higher-ups are being lenient with you, even though you refuse to reflect on your actions. You've rejected our offer, so you'll continue to be in confinement until you come to your senses. The ceremony was 10 days away, but the erudites' students were already holding their own celebration. They invited their teachers and the Leviathan unit, who sent representatives to attend. Many officials of the government and influential figures of Annapolis were also here to congratulate them and presented them with valuable gifts. Gilbert had always felt guilty about their lies, but even he had to admit that being in the spotlight was a wonderful thing. One of the guests held up a wine glass. After today, the next time we toast will be with the sovereign. The other guests raised their glasses in turn. Marshall and the other three were delighted, but they pretended to be modest on the surface. Thank you, everyone. To be honest, we don't feel like we're ready for the position. Why would you say that? Someone called out. If you're not qualified, who is? That's right, someone else said. You saved our country. That makes you more than qualified. You're the erudites' students, another guest chimed in. You four are the best candidates. We trust the Leviathan unit's judgment. Their flattery put the students in the spotlight. Marshall flashed a smile under the cheers of the crowd. Thank you for your approval. It would be rude of us to decline the position. We hope you can keep supporting us in the future. His words won the favor of the crowd. The guests raised their glasses for another toast. Just as the celebration reached its climax, another crisis arrived. Someone ran into the venue shouting frantically, "Stop the party! Something serious has happened! It's Vito! He's back!" The festivities came to a halt. The guests froze in fear. Their wine glasses slipped from their grasp and shattered on the floor. Marshall and the others never saw this coming. One guest recovered from his shock and turned to the person who'd yelled. What did you just say? Vito's back? He's alive? The person swallowed nervously and nodded. Who are you? Irwin demanded. This is a celebration. This is no place for you to be spreading rumors. Our students killed him, Sal said. You must have an ulterior motive for trying to ruin our celebration. Marshall strolled over to the person who'd made a scene and grabbed his collar. That's nonsense. Are you asking to be killed? Don't think you can say whatever you want just because this is a party. We killed him, Kenny said. The military was there. Don't spread false rumors. They were defending themselves confidently, but there were many guests who now had their doubts. Marshall and the others appeared calm on the surface, but they were actually concerned. They'd witnessed Vito and his opponents being dragged into the quicksand, and they weren't sure if they were really dead. To cover their bases, they'd mobilized hundreds of thousands of soldiers to conduct a blanket search in the desert, but they didn't find Vito and his opponents' remains. Without a body, their deaths couldn't be confirmed. But it was a fact that they'd both been pulled into the quicksand. It was impossible for them to have survived. The Leviathan unit's representatives shared a look before defending the students. This is a celebration, and you're causing a commotion. Vito is dead, and that's that. They motioned for their subordinates to drag the person out. Wait, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm telling the truth. There are already people from the Phoenix unit confronting him. He's here in Annapolis. They told me to come here and report to the Leviathan unit. The Phoenix unit's position was only second to the Leviathan unit's. No one would attempt to fake an order from either unit. The Leviathan unit's representatives and the students couldn't doubt his claims anymore. If the Phoenix unit exchanged blows with Vito, that meant that they were witnesses. Vito was alive. On the contrary, the erudites trusted their students. Our students killed him, Irwin insisted. He couldn't have come back to life. Perhaps there's been some kind of mistake. Did they recognize the wrong person? No, the Phoenix unit clearly said that Vito's in the city. He was so firm that the Leviathan unit's representatives turned to the students to question them. Tell us the truth. Is Vito really dead? Stephen had insisted that Vito was still alive, and even though the students had claimed they killed him, no one had found his body. Gilbert, who was already feeling guilty, was prepared to tell the truth. Actually, at that time, Marshall interrupted him. Of course he's dead. We killed him. Don't you believe in us? Marshall had been flustered by the unexpected news, but he calmed down when he thought about it logically. Even if Vito had survived the quicksand, he would have been heavily injured. Less than 2 weeks had passed since then. It wasn't enough time for him to recover enough to make it all the way to Annapolis. They probably made a mistake, Kenny added. Or maybe the person they fought wasn't Vito. Someone from Vindictus could be impersonating him to pretend like he's not dead. We won't be misled by small tricks like these, Colton said in disdain. Everyone quieted down at their words. Their analysis was reasonable and convincing. The Leviathan Unit's representatives chose to believe them. They got in contact with their leader and asked for his instructions. Vito's dead, but his followers are still trying to harm the country. Mobilize all forces to find out who's pretending to be him. At his command, the entire Leviathan unit mobilized. They went from house to house to search for him. When you find him, please hand him over to us, Marshall requested. We'll deal with him personally before becoming the sovereign. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to take over the position when the country's still in danger. The Leviathan unit's representatives were impressed with their attitude. You four are a blessing to the country. We'll let you deal with the impersonator then. They thought the Erudites' students were worried about the country and the people, but they were actually afraid that they would be exposed. They didn't know how much the impersonator knew. They had to silence him at the first possible moment. Stephen, who was meditating in the solitary confinement room, was oblivious to the panic overrunning the country. He opened his eyes when he sensed a presence running down the corridor. It was Lionel. After finding out that Vito had disappeared from his mansion while he was out, he hurried to the Leviathan Unit's headquarters to look for Stephen. The guards didn't stop him because of his prestigious identity. Mr. Adams, he's gone missing. Lionel was being vague because the guards could be listening in on their conversation. Stephen knew who he was talking about. Is he awake? He should be. I thought it would take him much longer to wake up, but he disappeared right after I checked on him. His quick recovery might be because of his special technique and the martial arts he cultivates. When you think about it like that, he's similar to you. Stephen was even more certain that there was a connection between the priest and Vito. If he's regained consciousness, he won't sit still. He's a danger to the city. Dr. Sloan, tell the Leviathan unit to come and see me. I can't leave until I'm released. Lionel hurried to find the Leviathan unit. They rushed over 10 minutes later. Stephen got straight to the point. Let me out. Vito's in the city. I need to restrain him. He's a risk to the civilians. We can't do that. The higher-ups have instructed us to keep you here until you reflect on your actions. What are you talking about? Millions of innocent lives are at stake. Don't you care about them? They could be being killed as we speak. Every minute counts. The Leviathan unit didn't take his warning seriously. Our country isn't dependent on you. The Erudites' students defeated him once, and they can do it again. Stephen knew that trying to convince them would be useless. He sat back down and closed his eyes. Even if he pretended to acknowledge their claims that he was lying, it would be too quick of a change in his attitude. They wouldn't believe him. While the Leviathan unit was searching for Vito's impersonator, the Erudites and students had decided to suspend the celebration with the excuse that it'd be more appropriate to celebrate after Vito's followers were caught and dealt with. Their teachers supported their decision. The celebration would be grander if the issues with Vito were settled once and for all. The guests sat in their respective seats and waited. As the minutes ticked by, Marshall and the others grew increasingly nervous. It would be fine if the impersonator was a survivor of one of Vito's subordinates, but if it was Vito himself, they wouldn't know how to handle it. Erwin noticed their tense expressions, but he didn't suspect anything. He assumed they were nervous because they'd spent all their time in the mountains and rarely mingled with society. You don't have to worry. They're Vito's subordinates. You killed their leader. His followers aren't worth mentioning. Marshall and the others nodded absent-mindedly. At this time, the Leviathan unit was searching every nook and cranny in Annapolis. Vito watched them scurry with a grin on his face. He'd knocked out the Phoenix unit when they spotted him to avoid drawing attention to himself, but he hadn't expected the Leviathan unit to find out so soon. The cat was out of the bag, so he might as well roll with it. When a group of Leviathan unit members left the house they'd just searched and were deciding where to go next, a familiar face appeared up ahead. Vito? They stammered. Vito regarded them with a smile. Yes, it's me. The group tensed and prepared for a fight. There was no mistaking it. The man in front of them was Vito himself. No one could imitate his aura. Be on your guard, everyone. He's alive. Vito frowned. Who told you I'm dead? The group was too intimidated to speak properly, but Vito didn't have any intention of killing them. I'll let you go. Go back and report to your superiors that this time I'll turn the country upside down and ravage Annapolis to the ground. With a wave of his hand, he sent a torrent of wind barreling into the group, slamming them into the wall. They ignored their injuries, picked themselves off the floor, and ran off. The Leviathan unit's representatives and the erudites' students were waiting for an update at the venue. They were surprised when the group burst into the room. What's going on? How did you sustain such heavy injuries? Vito's really in Annapolis. He's threatening to ruin the city. The Leviathan unit didn't have to question them further to know that they were telling the truth. Their unit represented the supreme leader. Every member was a skilled martial artist. Not just anyone could have injured them to this extent. The erudites were still suspicious. They firmly believed in their students. Are you sure? Did you see him clearly? Was it really him? The Leviathan unit interjected. Their statements are credible. This is a serious matter. They wouldn't make a mistake. There was nothing else Irwin and the others could say. They turned to their students for an explanation. And it wasn't just them. Everyone in the room looked at them, waiting for them to explain themselves. Marshall and his fellow students started to panic. They didn't think Vito was really in Annapolis. From the nervous looks on their faces, the Leviathan unit knew they were hiding something. Shouldn't you give us an explanation? Were you not the ones who dealt with Vito? Why is he still alive? Did you deceive us? The four of them didn't know what to say. Their teachers prompted them to speak. What's going on? Just tell us. Whatever it is, we'll help you. With everyone's attention on them, Marshall blurted, We did kill him. We saw him sink into the quicksand. How were we supposed to know he survived that? Their teachers' stern expressions relaxed. Irwin spoke up in their students' defense. So that's how it is. We can't fault you for that. You requested the military to search the desert, but his body was never found. His martial arts are unlike any other, Sal said. It would have been strange if he was killed so easily. There's nothing to worry about. You four defeated him before. You can do it again. Norman nodded. Crush his bones and scatter his ashes. He won't be able to recover from that. The Leviathan unit was convinced. We missed the battle last time, so this is a good opportunity for you to show us how you took him down. Marshall and the others were dumbfounded. They'd never defeated Vito in the first place. How were they supposed to defeat him now? The array was useless, and they were scared out of their minds when he chased them down. If they went and confronted Vito, they'd be sending themselves to their deaths. The Leviathan unit wasn't aware of their inner turmoil. Get ready. Vito's in the city. Make sure he's dead this time. Your battle will go down in history. Marshall and the others were on the verge of tears, but they couldn't refuse. Their teachers noticed the strange looks on their faces. What's the matter? You don't look so good. Do you have any other questions? Marshall forced a smile. No, we were just wondering what kind of monster he was. We don't understand how he survived a quicksand. Not to worry, we'll send our people to assist you, the Leviathan unit said. We have to secure his death. Marshall and the others had no reason to reject. Soon, the Leviathan unit announced that the country would fight to the death with Vito, and the erudites' students would be representing them. Because Vito himself had appeared in Annapolis and was not an impersonator, the celebration ended halfway. After the guests left, reality began to sink in. Marshall and the others were so close to becoming the sovereign. But that was the least of their concerns. They didn't know how they were going to face off against Vito. They'd hid behind the vanguard at the military base, but here in the city, all eyes were on them, including the Leviathan unit, their teachers, and the public. There was nowhere to hide and no one to make their scapegoat. The Leviathan unit had sent a letter of challenge to Vito. The entire country knew about the upcoming battle. The streets were filled with banners cheering for the Erudites' students. Who cares if Vito somehow revived? The Erudites' students killed him once, and they can do it again. The battle will take place in Annapolis. We can see it for ourselves. They're going to become the sovereign after this. I have no doubt they'll succeed. I'm looking forward to their victory. As for Vito, he laughed when he received the letter of challenge. He accepted it without hesitation. It would save him the trouble of seeking them out one by one. The Leviathan unit chose the location. The battle would take place at the mountain range near Annapolis. They'd chosen this location so that the entire country could witness the battle for themselves. The people were disappointed when the live broadcast was cut off last time, but today would be different. They would have an opportunity to rush to the mountain and witness the grand occasion. Vito had reached the peak of the mountain a while ago. He was waiting for the Leviathan unit to arrive. The city of Annapolis was lively and bustling with excitement. The residents stood on both sides of the streets to say goodbye to the Erudites' students and wish them a safe journey. The battle hadn't even taken place yet, and the four of them were already being treated like heroes. Under the Leviathan unit's escort, Marshall and the others made their way to the mountain. Despite the Leviathan unit and their teachers' confidence in them, they were a bundle of nerves. They would have been too scared to walk away if they weren't being nudged along. The Leviathan unit had prepared for the battle in advance. They'd sent their people to surround the peak in case Vito tried to escape when the students drove him into a corner. Vito didn't care. He was amused watching them run around, trying to get into their positions. He was confident that he would win. After his fight with the Sovereign, his strength had increased significantly. The Erudites' students hadn't arrived yet, but the peak was surrounded by spectators. When they saw the mocking look on Vito's face, the crowd started criticizing him. "Stop being so full of yourself. It's not too late to surrender. We're near Annapolis, the heart of the country. You'll never escape." Vito cast them a sidelong glance and waved his hand. A gust of wind swept up the spectators nearby and dumped them further down the mountain. The surrounding crowd ran away in a panic. The scene turned chaotic. Just before a stampede could happen, a voice rang out. "Vito, do you know where you are? How dare you cause a commotion so close to Annapolis?" It was Erwin and the other Erudites. Their students trailed slowly behind them. Their hearts were pounding, and their legs felt like lead. No one noticed their unusual behavior. They thought they were strolling along because they were confident in taking Vito down a second time. Vito laughed upon seeing them. "So, it's you four geezers. What are you doing here?" "Don't think you've won," Erwin warned. "We're here to watch your execution. We only managed to restrain you back then, but our students will finish you off for good," Sal said. Vito laughed harder. Erwin and the others looked at each other in confusion. They couldn't understand what was so funny. "What are you laughing at?" Erwin demanded. Vito smirked. "I'm not the same as I used to be. That person's already dead. Who else can match up to me?" "You won't be arrogant for long," the Leviathan unit's leader said. "You'll meet your end in front of the entire country today." "That will depend on your abilities. Do you even have anyone else to send out?" "Of course we do. The Erudites' students took you down the first time, and they'll do it again." The amusement on Vito's face turned into confusion. "What? Who did you say took me down?" While he was processing the leader's words, the Leviathan unit pushed Marshall and the other 3 students to the front. They'd seen Vito up close before, and being this close to him again unnerved them. They lowered their heads, too afraid to meet his gaze. Vito narrowed his eyes as recognition sank in. "So it was you four who defeated me." Marshall and the others didn't answer. They stared at the ground. Their cowardly reaction made Vito burst out laughing again. The Leviathan unit couldn't understand why Vito was so confident when the erudites' students had dealt with him once before. "Vito, you lost to our students," Erwin said. "Aren't you afraid of death?" Sal agreed. "Defeating you a second time is no big deal." "You should surrender," Norman suggested. Vito gave them a disdainful look. "You four are old and muddle-headed. Why don't you ask your students what really happened?" Vito had grasped the situation the moment the Leviathan unit pushed the erudites' students in front of him. The Sovereign was dead, so the four of them had taken the credit from him. Everyone turned to look at Marshall and the other three students. It was then that they realized that something wasn't right. The four of them had never declared that they could defeat Vito a second time. And on closer inspection, they were shaking and staring at the ground. Fear was written all over their faces. "Isn't the Leviathan unit supposed to be representative of the Supreme Leader?" Vito mocked. "You still don't know what's going on. How could you let a bunch of kids get the better of you?" The Leviathan unit and the erudites shared an awkward look. They were being publicly humiliated by their enemy. "Since you still seem to be in the dark, then I'll enlighten you. Did you really think your students are that capable?" "We spent over 100 years perfecting the array," Erwin retorted. "It was designed to suppress your martial arts. We even trained our students for decades." Marshall and the others knew they were about to be exposed. They were too afraid to keep up the farce. The entire country had their eyes on the confrontation with Vito. Vito shrugged. "The truth is right in front of you. Why are you refusing to accept it? Run back to the mountains and hide away like you've been doing for the past century. You'll only embarrass yourself if you come out." Erwin glared daggers at him. "Don't get worked up. I'm just telling you the truth," Vito said matter-of-factly. "I could have killed your students whenever I wanted. That array you developed has no effect on me." "Well, you don't seem to understand what I'm saying, so why don't I just tell you directly instead of beating around the bush? Your 4 beloved students are deserters. Their array was useless, and they realized that they were no match for me, so they all turned tail and ran. In the face of death, a person's true nature is revealed. They didn't hesitate to sacrifice their team members to buy them time to escape. By the way, I heard you're planning to appoint them the Sovereign. Good job. You're single-handedly ruining this country." Vito's words were like a clap of thunder. The crowd stared at Marshall and the others, waiting for them to defend themselves. But their explanations didn't come. "We've been training our students for decades," Norman argued. "We know what they're like better than anyone. They would never do something so despicable." Norman was Gilbert's teacher, and he felt even more ashamed when his teacher tried to defend him. "Are you trying to stall for time?" Erwin asked. "We'll never believe that the array isn't effective." "Admit it. You're worried about fighting our students again," Sal said. "That's why you fabricated an entire story." "Stop the nonsense and let's start," Charles said. Vito was nonchalant. "I don't care when we begin, but have you asked your students whether they want to fight me or not? Or rather, shouldn't you ask them if they've ever defeated me in the first place?" Marshall and the others kept their heads down and didn't respond. They were acting completely different from before. A victor wouldn't cower in the face of a loser's provocation. With how things were going, even a fool would understand what was going on. The Leviathan unit's leader thought back to Stephen's claims. He had said that Vito wasn't dead and that the erudites' students weren't the ones who dealt with him. "Why are you 4 being so quiet?" the leader asked suspiciously. "Shouldn't you give us an explanation?" Vito's eyes gleamed. He killed swiftly and decisively. He never tortured his opponents or played around with their lives. But the students' charade made him realize that there was some entertainment to be had in keeping them alive. "What other explanation do you need? The fastest way to clear things up is to have them defeat me again." "Fine. Since you want to die so badly, we'll grant your wish," Erwin said. He and the other 4 erudites had always believed in their students. They wouldn't accept Vito's claims unless they witnessed the truth with their own eyes. Marshall and the others were terrified. They didn't move an inch. Between their reputation and their lives, they prioritized the latter. Their teacher's confidence in them was shaken when they hesitated. "Did you see that?" Vito asked with a grin. They don't even have the courage to look me in the eye, let alone fight me. What are you waiting for? Irwin urged. You need to rectify your reputation. Marshall and the others turned a blind eye and pretended like they couldn't hear him. Or at least, that's how it appeared. They were actually so nervous that they couldn't bring themselves to move. Their legs felt like jelly. Is what Vito said true? Their teachers asked tentatively. When their students didn't say anything, they left it at that. They were too ashamed to continue asking. Stop standing around, the Leviathan unit's leader said. Deal with him and prove to the people that you were telling the truth. The spectators cheered for them. However, Marshall and the others were on the verge of collapse. They shared a look, silently asking each other what they should do. There's only one thing we can do, Marshall said. We have to come clean. Compared to their reputation, their lives were more important. To their surprise, Gilbert was firmly opposed to his suggestion. He felt guilty about lying, but confessing the truth under such circumstances would be a fate worse than death. He'd prepared himself for the worst possible outcome. I'd rather die than admit something so shameful, Gilbert declared. Without warning, he rushed at Vito. His sudden attack stunned Marshall, Colton, and Kenny. But since things had come to this, they couldn't back down. They could only follow Gilbert and attack Vito together. Irwin nodded in approval when their students finally made a move. I told you, our students are not that pathetic. Vito's claims are false. Sal expressed his agreement. They're young and inexperienced, so this is probably the first time they've been ridiculed in public. It's not surprising they needed some time to compose themselves. Their martial arts are more than capable of taking Vito down, but there's no need to drag out the fight, Norman suggested. That's true, Charles said. He called out to their students. Don't hold back! Use the array! The crowd was riled up when they finally took action. Their cheers for them were endless. Marshall and the others heard Charles's instructions. They had no choice but to attempt the array again, even though they knew it would be useless. They got into positions, set up the array, and chanted the incantation to activate it. The moment the array appeared, the ground shook violently, and a blinding light enveloped the peak of the mountain. Vito disappeared in the light as dust billowed into the air. The crowd thought Vito had met his end, but when the smoke settled, they were astonished to see him standing in the same spot and calmly dusting his clothes. The Leviathan unit's leader recalled Stephen's claims again. The array really didn't have an effect on Vito. Irwin, on the other hand, remembered their students' claims. He had to have been injured. He's pretending to throw us off. Keep going. He won't be able to hold on much longer. Marshall and the other three knew that the array would be ineffective no matter how many times they activated it, but since their teacher was telling them to try again, they had no other choice but to listen. The array was their teacher's trump card. They had spent their entire lives designing it. It was hard for them to believe that it hadn't done a thing. The four of them braced themselves and once again activated the array. The result was still the same as before. Vito was unharmed. I barely felt it. I suggest you try harder. Oh wait, are you out of moves? Then it's my turn. His aura surged, and a wave of energy sent the four of them crashing to the ground. They couldn't even block the attack. Everyone was at a loss for words. The array had been activated twice in a row, but it hadn't made a scratch on Vito. What's more, it only took him one move to seriously injure the students. The crowd couldn't help but voice their doubts. What's going on? Didn't the students beat him once already? Why does he have the upper hand this time? Vito had barely used any strength, but the students had suffered a crushing defeat. It was obvious that there was a huge gap between their martial arts. Even the Leviathan unit and the erudites had nothing to say. The truth was glaring them in the face. Vito had a maniacal smile on his face. You saw what happened, right? These so-called saviors lost in a second. They're not the ones who fought on par with me. Are you trying to imply that someone else fought you? Irwin asked. That's right. You've seen what your students are capable of. They're no match for me. Irwin glanced at his students. They looked away, too afraid to meet his gaze. Their expressions were the confirmation he needed. Vito was telling the truth. The 4 students they were so proud of couldn't compare to him. Not only that, they'd abandoned their team and ran away like cowards. Erwin was so angry that he couldn't speak. Marshall and the others felt even more ashamed, especially Gilbert. He desperately wanted to find a hole to hide in. Their lies had been exposed in front of the entire country. And they weren't just liars. They were deserters who'd sacrificed their team for their own lives. In the eyes of the people, the saviors they'd held so much respect for had turned into scumbags in a matter of minutes. The feeling of falling to rock bottom from the top was not a pleasant experience. Gilbert, whose self-worth had taken a huge blow, couldn't bear the pressure. He steeled his heart and gritted his teeth. "I'm not a deserter!" he shouted. Then he charged at Vito. "You're overestimating yourself," Vito said. He struck out with his palm and dealt Gilbert a fatal blow. Gilbert had been riddled with guilt ever since the first confrontation with Vito, and perhaps only in death could he truly be free from his crimes. Marshall, Colton, and Kenny were shocked by Gilbert's sudden death. They never saw it coming. If they threw themselves at Vito like him, they would be freed from this predicament. But they were terrified of death. "He couldn't even withstand a single blow," Vito said, sounding bored. "There's 3 of you left. Didn't you say you wanted to stop me? Then come at me." The 3 of them were too afraid to respond. They retreated to the side. Vito's intimidating aura was too much for them. The entire country bore witness to their so-called saviors' true colors. Erwin reprimanded them. "What a disgrace. You're our students. You shouldn't be so afraid of Vito, even if you can't win." "You should own up to your mistakes as Gilbert did," Sal said. The Leviathan unit's leader looked at them disapprovingly. Marshall, Colton, and Kenny couldn't take the pressure anymore and dropped to their knees. "We were in the wrong. We lied about everything." Their teachers had seen this coming, but they were still livid when their students admitted it. The Leviathan unit's leader wasn't doing much better. It was them who'd advertised the erudites as students. They'd always been a good judge of character. They'd promoted Stephen, Kylan, and Sylvie because they saw their potential, but they'd almost appointed the erudites as students as leaders of the country when they were far from qualified. This was a huge blow to the Leviathan unit's reputation. The leader didn't feel the need to be polite to them anymore. "What's going on? I want you 3 to tell us the truth." Marshall rushed to come clean. "I'll talk. The truth is, the array is useless against Vito." "He wasn't lying when he said he was much stronger than he was 100 years ago," Colton said. "We didn't mean to hide it for so long," Kenny said regretfully. Even if the operation had failed, given his status in the army, if he trained for a few more years, he could have become the backbone of the military. But now that would only ever be a pipe dream. Their teachers found it hard to accept, especially Erwin, who had the highest expectations for them. The spectators also couldn't believe it. Just a moment ago, they'd held great respect for the erudites as students and pinned their hopes on them. "Do you have anything else to say?" the leader asked coldly. "When the array failed and Vito chased after us, we sacrificed the vanguard to buy us time to run," Marshall continued, hanging his head. "The vanguard were elite martial artists we carefully selected to assist you in the operation. They weren't there to be used as sacrifices. Is this how you treat our country's people?" The leader wasn't the only one getting angry. The spectators were filled with righteous indignation and started criticizing them. The words shameless and degenerate echoed from the crowd. Erwin and the others were aggrieved. They were old, and their students were supposed to carry on their legacy. They took pride in their students. Never had they expected them to ruin their reputation like this. "What else are you hiding?" the leader demanded. "Tell us the whole truth." Right now, the Leviathan unit's priorities had shifted from Vito to the students. They needed to know the truth. As for Vito, he stood there and watched the entertaining show quietly. "We didn't defeat him," Marshall went on. "It was someone else. The battle was intense, so we weren't able to watch it up close. We don't know who it was. Towards the end, they both sank into the quicksand. That's when the military arrived. We lied and told them we killed Vito to make sure we weren't exposed, and we killed all of the witnesses at the scene." The leader frowned. "Kylan reported that to me. He said you went against our country's regulations and killed more than 10,000 of Vito's subordinates who already surrendered. I thought you did it for the good of the country, but it was for your own selfish desires." "What about the supposed 19 deserters?" a higher-up of the Leviathan unit questioned. "They never abandoned their team to begin with, am I right? They witnessed the truth, so you killed them before they could rat you out." "Yes," Marshall answered honestly. "They'd already been exposed. There was no other option but to admit it." Vito laughed and gave them another round of applause. "That was much more entertaining than any movie I've ever watched." Irwin and the others were utterly humiliated by their students. The crowd shared their sentiments. The saviors they'd admired and held so much respect for had deceived the entire country. The Leviathan unit was the most humiliated out of everyone present. Not only was this a fatal mistake, it was a heavy blow to their reputation. They hadn't officially appointed the students as the sovereign yet, but the whole world already knew about the celebration that would have been held in 10 days. The students had even hosted a high-profile celebration. The Leviathan unit's reputation had been tarnished, and the country had lost face in front of the entire world. Every member of the unit was ashamed. Irwin shook his head and muttered to himself. "We trained our students for so many years. We thought we knew them well, but maybe we never understood anything about them to begin with." Sal, Norman, and Charles felt the same way. They'd lived for over a century, but their wisdom had failed them. Vito's amusement was on full display. "What did you call them before? Oh, right, wasn't it saviors of the country? What nonsense! Who in the country can match up to me?" No one spoke. They'd placed their hopes on the erudites as students. Now that the truth had been revealed, who else could fight with Vito? "Speaking of which, I feel sorry for all of you. If it weren't for that person, you might still have had a chance. I should thank him. It's because of his profound cultivation that my own martial arts improved during the fight." Vito had caused mass destruction across the country over 100 years ago by himself. If he was stronger than back then, their country was doomed to fall. If there was anyone who could stop him, it certainly wouldn't be the erudites' students. The spectators had been in high spirits when they hurried over to watch the battle, but now they lost all hope. The Leviathan unit was at a loss. Their tarnished reputation was dangerous for the country, but it was even more dangerous when there was an enemy on their territory who they couldn't handle. Vito glanced at the crowd. "Why aren't you saying anything? Did you lose your voice all of a sudden?" His gaze fell on Marshall, Colton, and Kenny. "Didn't you three announce to the public that you stopped me once before? Bring it on." They didn't respond or look at him. "How cowardly. Well, if the students are too afraid, their teachers should step up." Vito looked at Irwin and the others. "You restrained me back then. Can you still do the same?" Aside from Irwin, who was fuming, Sal, Norman, and Charles looked at each other in dismay. More than 100 years ago, they had restrained Vito, but the process had been arduous. The country had sent hundreds of thousands of troops to assist them and set up all sorts of traps just to capture him. And after all that, they couldn't kill him and could only imprison him in the Abyssal Penitentiary. A century had passed since then. Vito had retained his youth, while Irwin and the others were now reaching the end of their lives. Even if they were on equal footing back then, they were worlds apart now. The Leviathan unit's leader clenched his fists, his nails digging into the skin and drawing blood. They were surrounded by martial artists, but not a single one who was capable of fighting on par with Vito. Vito noticed him losing his composure. "Your country brags about how fast it is and its numerous secrets, but there's no one who can stop me. How about this? I'll give you two options. You can choose the fate of the country for yourself. First, the country will surrender to me. I will be the new supreme leader." The Leviathan unit's leader refused immediately. "No." Vito didn't think much of it and continued. "Second, if the higher-ups of the Leviathan unit and the other 4 erudites kneel to me on a live broadcast, I'll leave the country and won't kill anyone else." The Leviathan unit represented the core officials of the U.S., and the erudites held a prestigious position in the country. Vito's demand was a blatant insult. The leader glared at Marshall, Colton, and Kenny. If he had the choice, he would kill them right here and now, but there was no point in blaming them. It wouldn't help resolve the crisis. Vito's second demand was also impossible to fulfill. Would today be the end of the country? The other members of the Leviathan unit spoke up. This isn't the end. We'll never lower our heads to the enemy. Even if he's stronger than he was a century ago, we have over 10,000 people here. There's nothing to be afraid of. Even if we die, we can't let him humiliate our country. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Kill him and defend the country!" Everyone else followed his lead and chanted the same slogan. The Leviathan unit's leader was touched by their determination. More than 10,000 members of the unit rushed at Vito, but none of them could get close to him. One punch had sent them careening to the ground. Marshall, Colton, and Kenny exchanged a glance. They had the same thought. It was time for them to run. They took a step back and ran for their lives. They didn't stop for even a second to consider their teacher's safety or who they were leaving behind. The higher-ups of the Leviathan unit were furious to see them fleeing, but they were the least of their concerns. 10,000 of their members had been incapacitated. If this continued, the country would have no choice but to submit to Vito. The leader was at his wit's end. He didn't care about his image anymore and yelled at the higher-ups. "Hurry up and think of a way to get us out of this! If the rest of us are killed, the country's done for!" The higher-ups racked their brains. At that moment, someone suggested, "We still have someone else on our side. The Sovereign!" The leader's eyes lit up. He'd forgotten about Stephen in a moment of crisis. "He claimed that the students were lying and that he was the one who stopped Vito," one of the higher-ups said. "His words aligned with Vito's. We misunderstood him." Most of the higher-ups nodded in agreement, but there were some who had their doubts. Was it really him, though? This time, the leader was inclined to stand on Stephen's side. He'd long forgotten about how he didn't believe in him. "It's very likely. Use your brain to think it through. If it wasn't him, how could he have had such a clear picture of the situation on the battlefield? And if you think about it, he's never lied before. If he said he dealt with Vito, then it has to be true." "There's one more thing," another higher-up said. The soldiers who escorted the remaining members of the vanguard reported that they insisted that Eden Fallon killed Vito. The students said they executed Eden already, but if he was strong enough to fight on par with Vito, it doesn't make sense for him to be killed so easily. The only explanation is that the Sovereign took Eden's place like he claimed. The leader nodded. He was telling the truth all along. He really cares about the country. Even if he went against our orders, he was only doing it for the greater good. He always has the country's best interest in mind. He's our only hope right now. Release him and tell him to hurry over." When the Leviathan unit left for the mountains with the erudites and their students, they'd sent more of their members to guard the solitary confinement room and keep an eye on Stephen. While the guards were carrying out their duties, they were also monitoring the battle with Vito. In the beginning, they were disappointed that they'd missed the opportunity to see the battle for themselves, but after receiving news that it hadn't gone the way they'd planned, they were glad they weren't there. Their respect and admiration for Stephen grew when the students' lies were exposed. He'd told the truth and didn't back down even when no one believed him. The guards gathered in front of Stephen's room. He didn't bother opening his eyes when he sensed them approaching. "What do you want?" "Mr. Adams, you're incredible," one of the guards said excitedly. "Just like you said, Vito's not dead and the students lied." "Is that so? You don't have to address me so formally. I'm not the Sovereign anymore." The guards were confused. "Not long ago, the Leviathan unit removed me from my position. I'm just a civilian now." Only then did the guards come to a realization. The Leviathan unit had removed Stephen from his position as the Sovereign, confined him, and made him reflect on his actions. The guard wanted to say something, but Stephen spoke first. "If there's nothing else, then don't bother me." After that, he didn't pay any more attention to them. The guards sighed, but they couldn't blame him. The Leviathan unit had placed their trust in the wrong people and crossed the line. When they went back to the door, they saw 2 Leviathan unit members rushing over. "Open the door!" The guards didn't know what was going on, but they held the door open for them. The 2 members didn't stop and walked past them. "We need to see Mr. Adams immediately." They quickened their pace to Stephen's confinement room. The guards followed them down the corridor. The 2 members stopped in front of the door and peered through the small opening. "Mr. Adams, the Leviathan unit has an urgent order for you. Vito is threatening the country. We need you to hurry over and resolve the crisis." They were in a fluster, but Stephen didn't respond. He sat quietly, meditating with his legs crossed and his eyes closed. It was like he didn't hear a word they said. The 2 members shared a look before turning back to Stephen. They became anxious, and their voices rose as they repeated themselves. He still didn't answer. They turned to glare at the guards. "Stop standing around and open the door." The guards made haste and unlocked it. The 2 members walked straight into the room and crowded in front of Stephen. One of them bent down and patted his shoulder. "Mr. Adams, wake up. This is urgent." Stephen opened his eyes and stared at them with a displeased expression. "What business do you have with me?" The 2 members felt awkward. They weren't expecting him to be so cold to them. He was acting like they had nothing to do with each other. They quickly recovered from their surprise. "Mr. Adams, please accept our urgent order. Vito's threatening our country. We need you to stop him." They looked at him with anticipation, but his attitude remained cold and indifferent. "I'm sorry. You have the wrong person. I'm not the sovereign. I'm just a civilian. You should pass on your orders to the real sovereign." The 2 members were confused. "Mr. Adams, this is no time to joke around. Who here doesn't know you're the sovereign?" Although Stephen's identity was kept a secret from the public, a majority of the Leviathan unit had found out that he was the sovereign recently. "Who's joking around?" Stephen said. "I think it's you 2 who are messing with me. I'm just a civilian. I couldn't possibly take on the sovereign's responsibilities." It dawned on the 2 Leviathan unit members that just yesterday, the higher-ups had told Stephen that they would remove him from his position and appoint the students as the new sovereign. They'd also told him to stay in confinement until he reflected on his actions. A week ago, they never would have expected things to turn out this way. All of Stephen's claims were true. The students had lied, and they'd killed hundreds of innocents. The Leviathan unit had never made such a grave mistake in all of history. The 2 members understood how Stephen was feeling, but this was an emergency, and they didn't have time to appease him. "We understand that this is our mistake. We represent the Leviathan unit and will restore your status as the sovereign. Please head over and stop Vito. Time is of the essence." To their surprise, Stephen started laughing. "Is this how the higher-ups of our country handle important positions? You remove me from the position and then restore my status when you feel like it. Do you think this is some kind of child's play?" The 2 members had nothing to say to that. Stephen continued his questioning. "And who are you 2 supposed to be? You don't have the authority to restore my position." The 2 of them became even more embarrassed because he hadn't said anything wrong. They weren't qualified to restore his identity. They were only messengers, passing the orders along. "There's no one in the country who can stop him, Mr. Adams. He'll take over Annapolis if you don't take action." "If the situation is so urgent, then you should find someone who can help you. Why are you looking for a civilian like me? Shouldn't you be looking for the erudites as students? They stopped him once before." "They deceived us. They ran away from Vito and took credit for what you did because of their greed. We know the truth now. Please stop him." The guards couldn't take it anymore. They mustered up their courage and defended Stephen for this injustice. "The higher-ups are so shameful. At the first sign of an emergency, they come running back to Mr. Adams. They claimed he pretended to take credit for a merit that wasn't his, but he never did anything like that." The 2 Leviathan unit members also understood that Stephen had suffered a huge grievance. He'd always listened to them. This was the first time he was turning them away. Frankly, if this had happened to anyone else, they would have forsaken the country a long time ago. "We understand you're upset, but please put your personal feelings aside for the sake of the people. Stopping the threat is more important. You've always been willing to go the extra mile for the country." Stephen nodded. You're right. I've always done the best I could. I repeatedly requested you investigate the students' claims, but none of you listened. I've always firmly believed that if you use someone you trust, you'll never have to doubt them, even when the situation says otherwise. It's clear that I'm not worthy of your trust, so please don't use me anymore. We know that with our identities, we don't have the authority to restore your position, but as messengers, we represent the entire Leviathan unit. We would like to apologize and admit our mistakes. The students deceived all of us. After this is over, we'll clear your name and restore your reputation. Please, temporarily set aside your personal grudges and stop Vito. There's no one else in the country who can handle him. The guards were filled with righteous indignation. What right do you have to say that? Mr. Adams stated very clearly from the beginning that Vito was alive. He even requested the higher-ups to let him leave when Vito appeared again, but they still didn't trust him. Hearing the guards tell them off so bluntly and listing their mistakes in detail, even the two members couldn't help but redirect their anger at the Leviathan unit's leader. Stephen pointed at the door. I'm a civilian. I'm just one inconspicuous individual among millions of civilians. The crisis is out of my hands. Please head back. The two members had no choice but to leave and hurry back to report this to the Leviathan unit's leader. The unit and the erudites had retreated from the mountain to discuss what to do next. He already knew that Vito had threatened the city and even volunteered to stop him. Who didn't report this to me? The leader's murderous gaze swept over the other members. One of the higher-ups admitted it. It was my fault. He did say that, but given the circumstances, who would have believed him? The rest of the unit agreed. But if Stephen doesn't come, who can stop Vito? Another higher-up asked. The members fell silent. The leader heaved a sigh. You can talk in circles as much as you want, but the fact is, we made a mistake. This is on us. If the sovereign doesn't help, Annapolis is done for. The leader was regretting his decisions, but he never thought of apologizing to Stephen. With the Leviathan unit's prominent status, they'd always been high and mighty and regarded others with a condescending attitude. The other members shared their opinion. Someone interrupted their conversation. Stephen's not worthy of being the sovereign. This is an emergency, and all he cares about is his personal grudge. He's too narrow-minded for the position. The Leviathan unit glanced over. It was Marshal, Colton, and Kenny. They'd come back at some point after running away. Shut up, the leader snapped. You three have no right to speak. He was still fuming after the truth came out. They were in this mess because of the students. Marshal, Colton, and Kenny shrank back after his scolding. Erwin had regained his composure and expressed his support. I agree with them. Our country's on the verge of ruin, and Stephen's being so petty. He's only thinking about his own grievances. He clearly doesn't have his priorities straight. Exactly, Sal echoed. He's the sovereign, but he doesn't care about the people. He's not worthy of the position anymore. The situation is at risk of escalating with every second he delays, Charles said. Vito's staying put for now because he's waiting for us to make our decision, but who knows when he'll go off the rails. With this new argument in place, many people had started to side with Erwin and the others. Marshall saw an opportunity and said, We admit that we shouldn't have lied, but this country is in danger. Can't Stephen forget about his personal conflicts temporarily and own up to his responsibilities? Colton and Kenny agreed. The Leviathan unit member who'd been sent to pass the message to Stephen spoke up in his defense. He does want to be loyal to the country, but he said he's not the sovereign anymore. He's a civilian and the crisis is beyond him. The leader massaged his temple in frustration. This is all my fault. Why did I remove him from his position? Making a civilian take up the responsibility of saving the country from a national crisis was indeed unreasonable. The Leviathan unit would seem incompetent to the people if they couldn't handle this on their own. We did make a mistake, but Stephen shouldn't be bringing his personal grudge into this, one of the higher-ups said. A second higher-up voiced disagreement. Even if he's not the sovereign anymore, he's still a citizen of the country. Everyone has a responsibility to serve the country, and he used to serve in the military. He should be prepared to fight on the front lines when the situation calls for it. He has a duty to follow our orders and stop Vito. He shouldn't be throwing a tantrum. The third higher-up added, "The point is, if Annapolis falls and the country ends up in our enemy's hands, the responsibility will go to Stephen. He'll become a sinner who allowed this to happen." It didn't take long for the higher-ups of the Leviathan unit to come to an agreement that Stephen was the reason the crisis had escalated to this point. Irwin shook his head in disappointment. "Even if he ends up stopping Vito, having someone like him in our country is a disgrace." "But our priority is to resolve the crisis," Sal said. "I have an idea. First, we'll overlook him disobeying orders and have him stop Vito. We'll hold him accountable after that." "That just might work," Charles said. But their discussion didn't get a response from the Leviathan unit. They could follow through with their suggestion, but the problem was, who could make Stephen take action? One of the higher-ups couldn't hold in his anger anymore. "This is outrageous," he yelled. "Is he waiting for our boss to personally request him to take action?" "What's the issue?" the Leviathan unit's leader asked. "I can do that much for our country's sake." Just as he was preparing to head back to headquarters and kneel to Stephen, the higher-ups stopped him. One of the higher-ups, Lance, volunteered to go in his stead. "We can't let you do that. You represent the core of the country. You can't lower your status to anyone. Why don't you let me go? I'm ranked 5th in the unit. My status should be high enough to request Stephen to make a move." He was adamant, so the leader nodded. "All right, I'll leave it to you." Lance hurried back to headquarters. Just like before, Stephen was still meditating with his eyes closed. The moment Lance entered the room, he aggressively berated him. "Stephen, don't cross the line. Our country is in danger. How dare you ignore our orders?" "I'm just a civilian," Stephen replied calmly. "It's not up to me to take up the mantle." "Don't you know what Vito's doing out there? Are you just going to let him wreak havoc in the city?" "I've already told you. I'm a civilian. I can't shoulder the responsibility of saving the country. Vito didn't provoke me, so why should I provoke him?" Lance bristled with anger. "Are you angry? If you want me to make my move, then show your sincerity." "I'm ranked 5th in the Leviathan unit. I came to personally request you to stop Vito. I'm already lowering myself to you. What else do you want?" "Your attitude is everything I need to know. You call me over when you need me and then toss me aside when you don't. I'm not the sovereign anymore. You can't sacrifice me whenever you feel like it. Please leave." "Do you really think you're the only one in the country who can handle Vito?" Lance said through clenched teeth. "Our Leviathan unit is giving you a chance. Don't be ungrateful." "If you have someone, then why are you coming to me?" "Fine. If that's your decision, then so be it. Our unit won't depend on you anymore. You said you're a civilian now? Then be a civilian." When Lance returned, the leader asked him anxiously, "How did it go? Did he agree?" "I've never met someone like him. He doesn't know how to appreciate favors. I don't think we can depend on him. Our country is big. I don't believe that he's the only one we can rely on." The leader didn't respond. Aside from Stephen, who else could take Vito on? The erudites, their students, and the aristocrats were no match for him. His subordinate hurried over to report. "Vito is attempting to leave the peak. Our people can't hold him back much longer." The situation had taken a turn for the worse. If Vito remained on the mountain, then they still had time to come up with a way to get out of this. But once he left, there was no telling where he would go and what he would do next. "I don't think we can stop him, even if we mobilize all the forces we have," one of the higher-ups said. Another higher-up agreed. "To be honest, stopping him is simple. We just need to find someone who's stronger than him. But does this person exist?" Lance was annoyed by how hard they were racking their brains. "Why are you all acting like it's the end of the world? We're the Leviathan unit. If we lose our confidence, our people will lose confidence in us. I don't believe that Stephen's the only one we have." There really is no one else, they thought. Lance ignored them and went up to the leader. "I suggest we use the Ursa subunit." The leader frowned. What did you say? The rest of the higher-ups were also stunned. We're already at this stage, Lance said resolutely. It's time for them to take action. The leader hesitated. It's a big deal to have them make their move. They're our final trump card. We also need all of the higher-ups' unanimous approval. The Leviathan Unit was an organization responsible for leading the country because they had a deep foundation and numerous confidential subdivisions. One of them was the Ursa subunit. It had been formed by 7 skilled martial artists. They were the Leviathan Unit's prized subunit and their trump card. They would never consider them an option unless it was a life-or-death situation. Even when Vito rampaged across the land over a century ago and destroyed Annapolis's military base not too long ago, they'd never considered using them because their martial arts were so profound that they could take over the country. Lance wasn't ranked 5th among the higher-ups for no reason. He was shrewd and cunning. He knew of the Ursa subunit's existence. That was why he was so confident when leaving Stephen's confinement room. The best outcome would be for Stephen to stop Vito, but since he was insisting on being a civilian, then this was their last resort. Ever since the Leviathan Unit was established, no one had ever disobeyed their orders. Therefore, they could not yield to Stephen. If we don't make a decision now, our country is finished, Lance urged. He raised his hand. I approve of sending the Ursa subunit to the front lines. He looked at the other higher-ups, prompting them to make their decision. Immediately, one of them agreed. Soon, the majority of the higher-ups raised their hands. The minority could only follow along. All of the higher-ups had come to a unanimous agreement, so the leader led them to the Leviathan Unit's forbidden area to relay their request. We've heard about Vito, the leader of the Ursa subunit said when they arrived. We've been wanting to meet him. They were restricted in the forbidden area, but that didn't mean they were completely unaware of what was happening in the outside world. However, without official orders, they couldn't casually leave the area. The Leviathan Unit had high expectations for them. The Ursa subunit was confident in their abilities. They didn't need a briefing from the Leviathan Unit. They were able to track down Vito's location by following his aura. When they made it to the peak of the mountain, they set up a formation. As one of the famed erudites, Vito was knowledgeable about the country's secrets. I heard you're the Leviathan Unit's trump card. I didn't think you really existed. If you've heard of us, then I suggest you surrender. Why would I? I want to see your martial arts in action for myself. The Ursa subunit didn't waste time with idle chatter. They ignored Vito's commands, combined their skills, and charged at him. Vito had been bored because there hadn't been anyone interesting since the Sovereign died. But the Ursa subunit piqued his interest. He assumed an offensive stance and prepared to attack. The Ursa subunit held their ground for several hours without being at a disadvantage, but they couldn't gain the upper hand. As the battle intensified, the gap in their strength was gradually revealed. Around 8 hours later, the Ursa subunit was driven into a corner. Vito didn't show any signs of fatigue. He'd gathered his energy and broke through their formation, forcing them back. Vito laughed wildly when they couldn't fight anymore. The Leviathan Unit should have sent you out sooner. That was a fun fight, but it's too bad that you're not my match. I won't kill you, though. Go back and pass on my message to your superiors. Ask them if they have anyone else. If not, then it's time for them to make a decision. The Ursa subunit's reputation was ruined. They trekked down the mountain dejectedly, and just like that, they vanished without a trace. No one knew where they went. They didn't report back to the Leviathan Unit, but the intelligence personnel conveyed the news to the higher-ups. What? The Ursa subunit lost? It's over, the leader muttered. Our country is finished. If even their trump card, the Ursa subunit, couldn't do anything to Vito, who else could resist him? The other higher-ups were also pessimistic. The only way out was to surrender. Lance stood up. It's not over. Stephen can stop him. Everyone looked at Lance. He'd been so confident that they didn't need Stephen, but now that they were in a dire situation, he was the first one to suggest circling back to where they started. The leader of the Leviathan unit resigned. Isn't it too late to ask Stephen for help now? Despite everything, we are at fault. If we trusted him, we could have taken care of Vito a long time ago. Things wouldn't have gotten to this point. He glowered at Lance. As for you, I asked you to request him to take action. But what did you do? You antagonized him and declared that we didn't need him. I was just protecting our authority, Lance protested. Didn't you see how arrogant he was the last time you met with him? He's acting like the country will be ruined if we didn't have him. I can't stand him. What right do you have to look down on him? The leader retorted. Can you save the country? Lance kept his mouth shut. He would lose in an instant if he went against Vito. The leader swept his gaze over the higher-ups. Who else can we rely on if not Stephen? Can you fight with Vito? What about you? Or you? The higher-ups lowered their heads and avoided making eye contact. The leader scoffed. That's what I thought. We need him, so let's stop wasting time and head over. This time around, be sure to show him that you're sincere. If you can't convince Stephen, then all of you will go out and face Vito. His threat intimidated them. If they went to the front lines and fought head-on with Vito, that was the same as sending themselves to an early grave. Lance was the first to respond. We'll go right now. The rest of the higher-ups answered in unison. Everyone followed the Leviathan unit's leader to the solitary confinement room. The erudites and their students had joined them in the corridor. Lance complimented Stephen the moment he stepped in front of the open door. Mr. Adams, we're here to request you to stop Vito. Only now did I realize that you're a blessing to the country. I'm sorry, but I'm just a civilian, Stephen said flatly. I can't bear the responsibility of being the country's blessing. You have the wrong person. Lance lowered his head. I'm very sorry about what happened earlier. I was talking nonsense and offended you. Stephen said nothing. The leader, who was watching them closely, began reprimanding Lance. Do you not realize the predicament we're in? Are you still putting on airs at a time like this? Kneel and apologize for how you disrespected Mr. Adams. Lance immediately dropped to his knees. That's not enough sincerity. The leader gestured to Marshall, Colton, and Kenny. You three, kneel with him. The three of them hesitated, but when they saw the murderous look in the leader's eyes, they knelt down without a word. Irwin staggered out of his wheelchair and knelt on the floor. Our country is in a crisis because of our students. As their teachers, we share the responsibility. Their crimes are our crimes. Sal, Norman, and Charles did the same. The Leviathan unit's leader knelt next to them. The higher-ups followed suit. This was the first time someone had been able to make all of the higher-ups lower their heads. Mr. Adams, please stop Vito, the leader pleaded. If you have any requests, we'll agree unconditionally. We've made a mistake, and we're here to apologize. Everyone stared at Stephen in anticipation, waiting for his reply. They didn't dare to rush him. Seconds passed in silence. 5 minutes later, Stephen opened his eyes, stood up, and left the room. He brushed past them and walked up the steps to the door. With one swing of his fist, it shattered and collapsed into a pile of rubble. Mr. Adams? The leader called out expectantly. Stephen ignored him. He turned around and walked up to Marshall, Colton, and Kenny. You three are criminals. We deserve to die for our crimes, they said hurriedly. Yes, you do deserve to die. Your fellow student already paid with his life. Stephen glanced at the crowd kneeling on the floor. I'm going to stop Vito and then eradicate the organizations that pose a threat to our country like Vindictus. The higher-ups were thrilled by his answer. At the very least, they wouldn't have to personally deal with Vito themselves. In the past few years, Stephen had resolved any crisis their country had faced. They had faith that he would get them out of this one as well. I can promise you that much, Stephen continued. But I want to make it clear that after stopping Vito, I won't be the sovereign anymore. I'll return to being a civilian. The Leviathan unit shared looks of dismay. They had said that they would agree to any request that Stephen might have, but they never imagined this to be his request. If he resigned from his position, it would be a great loss to the country. The leader knew that they only had themselves to blame. "Mr. Adams, please reconsider. I know you've done a great deal for the country, and at the same time, the country has also let you down. But I promise that if you continue to be the sovereign, we'll fulfill any requests you have. If you want to announce your identity, we can arrange that." "That's right. Please reconsider," another higher-up advised. "You're a talented martial artist, and you're young. You have a bright future ahead of you. Retiring so early is a pity." The rest of the unit tried to talk Stephen out of resigning from his position because they understood that as long as he was around, the country would never fall to ruin. "I've already made up my mind," Stephen said. "You don't have to try and persuade me anymore. There's no need to worry. I'm planning to resign, but I'll still stop Vito and annihilate Vindictus." The leader wanted to say something else, but the higher-ups interjected. "Our top priority is to resolve this crisis. We can discuss the rest later." "You're right," the leader said. "Mr. Adams, we'll discuss this further after we settle the issue at hand." Stephen smiled in amusement. "Wise decision. If you continue to try and convince me, Vito would have conquered Annapolis already." The leader averted his gaze awkwardly. "I'm heading out." Stephen motioned to Marshall, Colton, and Kenny. "I need them to come with me." The three of them were confused, but their only option was to brace themselves and follow him. The Leviathan unit's determination was revived with Stephen's presence. Vito was amused when the Leviathan unit returned with all of their forces in tow. "Your courage is admirable. Did you forget how your Ursa subunit was defeated? Are you here to die?" "We're going to stop you here and now," the leader declared. "With just the Leviathan unit?" "No." The leader stepped aside. The rest of the unit followed and made a path for Stephen. Marshall, Colton, and Kenny trailed after him. "You're not dead?" Vito asked in surprise. "No, I'm not," Stephen replied matter-of-factly. "If you're not dead, how could I be dead? The only reason you're still alive is because I dragged you out of that quicksand. I wanted to ask you a question." "What? Didn't Vindictus help me?" "They don't even have half of your strength. How'd they be capable of helping you?" Vito nodded in understanding. He was impressed. "I see. So you had everything under control. Are you here to stop me on behalf of the country? It won't be that easy." "We won't know until we fight." Stephen waved his hand. His inner energy enveloped Marshall, Colton, and Kenny, pushing them forward. "You three, face him first." Irwin and the others wanted to stop him, but there was nothing they could do. They were 4 elderly men in wheelchairs. They could only watch their students die a gruesome death. Marshall, Colton, and Kenny understood why Stephen had taken them along right before they were killed. They'd sacrificed the vanguard, killed his team, and deceived the country. Each of their crimes had a heavy consequence. Stephen looked on impassively as their blood splattered on the ground. "You're stronger than last time." "I am, but what about you?" Vito rushed towards Stephen. In only a few seconds, they'd exchanged over 100 blows. They were so fast that the Leviathan unit, who was surrounding them, couldn't see their movements clearly. The battle ended in 5 minutes with Vito on his knees. The resigned and tired look in his eyes reflected the events of the past century that had caught up to him. "Losing to you once could have been brushed off as unlucky, but losing to you twice proves I'm not as good as you. I admit defeat. I've lived a long life. It was an honor to meet you at the end of it. I don't have any regrets. The country hates me, so I don't expect you to spare me. The hatred is mutual. I've kept my wife waiting on the other side for too long. It's time for me to join her. Divine Sovereign, my life is in your hands." "That can wait. I have a question for—" Before Stephen could get the words out, an arrow struck Vito's chest. He was heavily injured from the fight, and an arrow to the heart was fatal. He collapsed onto his side. His eyes were open and staring lifelessly at the sky above. Stephen clenched his fist. His gaze swept over the Leviathan unit and fell on Lance. Who told you to shoot? He demanded. He had a question for Vito, but with him dead, he would never get his answer. Your martial arts are unlike any other, Lance said. You took him down in a matter of minutes, but it's not wise to keep him alive for too long. Killing him instantly is the best option. The leader agreed. The longer he's alive, the more uneasy we'll be. If we let him live, who knows what trouble he'll stir up in the future. The higher-ups supported Lance's decision. Stephen was frustrated, but there was nothing he could say. Vito was dead, and the crisis had been averted. There was no changing that. With Vito's death, the country recovered its vitality. The people left their homes, singing and dancing, celebrating their victory. The Leviathan unit didn't miss the chance to release an announcement. The Divine Sovereign has eliminated a century-long threat, turned the tides, and revived the country. The notice was simple, but it caused an uproar across the world. The Sovereign, whom everyone had thought perished in Cadus, had survived and gotten his country out of yet another national crisis. The United States' reputation reached its peak once more. With the Sovereign around, who could threaten their country? The hostile countries overseas, who were waiting to reap the benefits from Vito's tyranny, put an end to their covetous thoughts when they heard the news and sent congratulatory letters to the U.S. Now that the Sovereign was back, who wouldn't want to be on good terms with this country? There was a despondent atmosphere at the Leviathan unit's headquarters. It was a stark contrast to the festive mood outside. The crisis with Vito was over, but the next crisis was already here. The next crisis was naturally Stephen's decision to resign from his position as the Sovereign. After defeating Vito, his role had become even more important. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that his decision could affect the future of the country. With the Sovereign's existence, even Warhawk had to think twice before making a move. If Stephen resigned, the fate of the country couldn't be guaranteed. For the time being, his decision was top secret, but spies from foreign countries were everywhere. It would only be a matter of time before the news spread. Moreover, the Sovereign's popularity had soared after the recent battle. He was the topic of every discussion, and the entire world was trying to guess his true identity. If they found out that he'd retired, the country would once again be in danger. At this time, the higher-ups of the Leviathan unit were quietly staring at Stephen. He stood at the head of the table, neatly folding the banner that they'd given him just before he left for Cadus months ago. The corners were singed, and there were bloodstains that couldn't be washed off. Stephen placed the banner on the table. You gave me this banner before I left for the Transatlantic Summit. I've been meaning to return it to you. He held out his hand, and the Imperial sword materialized on his palm. It had been repaired not too long ago. He placed the sword next to the banner. Then he took out the tiger crest that the Leviathan unit had returned to him when he came back from Cadus. After placing the 3 items on the table, Stephen looked up at the Leviathan unit. The mask and the uniforms were ruined during the battle, so I'll only be returning the banner, the sword, and the crest. I'm officially resigning from my position as the Sovereign. The leader tried to dissuade him. Mr. Adams, our country still needs you. Please think it over for a few more days. This is an important decision to make. I've already made up my mind. Our country is vast, and there are numerous secrets yet to be discovered. With your connections, I'm sure you'll find someone else to take over the position soon enough. The leader sighed. If you insist on resigning, then we'll respect your decision. We know what you've done for the country. Since you've decided to retire, then we'll do our best to take care of Vindictus in your stead. Vindictus was a formidable opponent, but with the Leviathan unit's capabilities, they might be able to deal with them on their own. Stephen nodded. I have one last thing I'd like to say. Please don't treat the aristocratic families like tools again. We'll keep that in mind, the leader replied. All right, I'm leaving. As Stephen turned around and walked out, the Leviathan unit stood up and saluted him. They remained in that position until he disappeared from sight. 7 days later, Stephen was on a small boat, cruising down a long river that spanned the country. The boatman rowed oars and recited an ancient poem. After resigning from his position, Stephen didn't head home right away. He took a detour to take advantage of this rare moment of relaxation for a short vacation. He visited the famous tourist attractions nearby, like the mountains and rivers. When he reached Washington, D.C., he stepped off the boat and headed to the Cassidy family's residence. There was a large portrait of Eden Fallon in the main hall. Ron was holding a funeral for his son. After recent events, Eden's crime as a deserter had been revoked. He was hailed a hero, and he'd been awarded a medal for his contributions. Unfortunately, he was no longer around to receive it. The Cassidy family felt guilty because it had been their decision to make Stephen take Eden's place. They had tried to make up for it by attending the funeral for its entire duration. They were shocked when Stephen appeared in the doorway. "I'm back." Kim ran over and hugged him tightly. Her voice was choked with sobs. "I thought I'd never see you again." Stephen smiled and comforted her. "I won't be leaving again." Rebecca's sarcastic voice interrupted their moment. "How touching. The entire vanguard died on the front lines, but here you are, still alive and kicking. You must be destined for a long life." Helen cautiously glanced at Ron. He didn't pay any attention to Stephen's return. "Be quiet, Rebecca. This is a funeral." She could tell what Ron was thinking. His son was dead, so it was useless to condemn Stephen. Eden was gone, but he would be remembered as a heroic veteran. The only thing Ron wanted right now was to let him rest in peace. Rebecca sat back and didn't say anything else. Stephen walked towards the hall and paid his respects. Eden may not have been the best person when he was alive, but the dead deserved to be respected, and based on their familial ties, they were in-laws. "Thank you," Ron said quietly. Stephen didn't respond and left the hall. When the aristocratic family leaders found out that their leader had come back to Washington, D.C., they went to see him. They had been looking forward to his return. "Welcome back, Mr. Adams." They knelt in front of him. Stephen gestured to the seats in the hall. "You don't have to be so formal. Have a seat. Since everyone's here, let's have a leisurely chat." Everyone relocated to the hall. When they were all seated, Stephen announced, "I'm not the sovereign anymore. I've resigned." They stared at him in bewilderment, not understanding where this was coming from. Stephen had just resolved a national crisis, and his reputation was at an all-time high. They couldn't understand why he would choose to resign at a time like this. From the puzzled looks on their faces, Stephen realized that he'd just dropped a bomb on them. He proceeded to explain everything that had happened since Vito appeared. "I'm sorry for not bringing your families home safely." The aristocratic family leaders expressed their support and respected his decisions. They hadn't submitted to Stephen because he was the sovereign. They chose to follow him because of his absolute strength and leadership. He was charismatic and naturally inspired loyalty in others. "You don't have to apologize," Hayes said. "No one could have foreseen the erudites' students' betrayal. It doesn't matter what your identity is. You are our leader, and you always will be." With that out of the way, they moved on to more serious topics. Their discussion continued for the rest of the night as they made their plans to prepare for the future. The next morning, it was like nothing had happened. Stephen went home after a long absence. With him around, the Wyvern Group and Tanith Corporation's development sped up. They steadily opened up the market in the southern region of the country and expanded their business all the way to the northern region. Once they took down the northern region, Kim would be ranked in the top 10 elites of the business field. Aside from giving her suggestions and assisting with her work, Stephen spent most of his time cooped up at home with his daughter, Valeria. The Cassidy family was dissatisfied with him lazing around, but they couldn't do anything about it. At most, they could only mock him. But Stephen didn't take their ridicule to heart. After Vito's downfall, the country quickly recovered its vitality. The people resumed their daily lives, and there was a widespread surge of positivity. The leader of Vindictus, Odin, had smuggled the remainder of his subordinates out of the country through shady means. Adler had gifted them several islands and territories on land. He had also given them new identities as citizens of Warhawk. It was enough for Vindictus to survive overseas. Vito was dead, so they knew a head-on confrontation with the U.S. would result in their annihilation. They had to take a step back, escape the country, and devise a new plan. The Leviathan unit was frustrated when they found out that Vindictus had Warhawk's support and assumed prestigious identities overseas. Dealing with them would be harder than they'd expected. Vindictus stayed in their own territories and hadn't made a move since their escape. The only thing the Leviathan unit could do was wait for them to show themselves again. Many neighboring countries that had been targeting the U.S. expressed their willingness to be allies. The Leviathan unit knew that this wouldn't last for long. Once the sovereign's retirement was exposed, the country would once again be in danger. As time passed, the Leviathan unit began to miss Stephen more and more. Although their military consisted of talented martial artists like Kylan, Sylvie, and the 4 great generals, it wasn't enough to stabilize the country. 1 year later, the appearance of 10 martial artists who collectively called their group the Empyrean Circle drew the Leviathan unit's attention. There were rumors that their martial arts were as profound as the 5 erudites. More than a century ago, the erudites were considered the ceiling of the country's strength. And now, 10 youths who were rumored to be on par with them had appeared out of the blue. There was a possibility that their martial arts could rival Vito's or even the Sovereign's. The Leviathan unit assigned the Empyrean Circle members to protect the borders. They lived up to the rumors and rose up the ranks in their respective armies. Their arrival intimidated the countries overseas. Some people started calling them the Sovereign's successors. This was music to the Leviathan unit's ears. They had been worrying about Stephen's resignation, but the Empyrean Circle had the ability to fill in the void he'd left behind. What they didn't know was that Stephen was the one who'd trained the Empyrean Circle members. This was the serious discussion he'd had with the aristocratic family leaders right before he returned to Washington, D.C. Each family had selected a handful of talented martial artists from their respective families for Stephen to evaluate. He'd chosen the top 10 he thought had the most potential. For the past year, Stephen appeared to be living an ordinary life. But in secret, he'd been studying the aristocrats' combat techniques, cultivation techniques, and medical skills. After a period of intensive study, he'd mastered every technique there was to learn and personally trained the 10 talented aristocrats. He'd designed a set of cultivation techniques that suited their constitution and had even developed an array. If the 10 of them cast the array together, it could take down a martial artist like Vito in one strike. With the array at their disposal, if the Empyrean Circle stayed together, they would be invincible. Even if they were separated, they would still have the ability to dominate a region. Their talent and training put them above everyone else as soon as they made their appearance. The Leviathan unit's concerns about Stephen's retirement dissipated. They spent a lot of effort to promote the Empyrean Circle to the public. That way, they could downplay the role of the Sovereign so that when his retirement was exposed, it wouldn't have as much of an impact. For a time, the Empyrean Circle took over the headlines of newspapers, magazines, and the internet. Stephen was sitting in front of the TV, watching a promotional video of the Empyrean Circle. Kim was passing by and happened to see the video. They say our country has too many secrets to count. I guess the rumors were true. It's only been a year since the Sovereign made his last appearance, but the Imperial Circle is already making the headlines. Stephen smiled. That's how it should be. The higher-ups had gone a little overboard with the promotions, but it wasn't a big deal. The more their reputation spread, the more the countries overseas would hesitate to antagonize them. When you were the commander, you were constantly worried about the country and the people, Kim said. Now that the officials have the Sovereign and the Empyrean Circle, you don't have to shoulder all the responsibilities anymore. Yeah, with them around, I don't have to worry. I can live a peaceful life with my family. Valeria settled into Stephen's lap and blinked up at him curiously. Daddy, you don't want to be the Sovereign anymore? Stephen patted her head. If I'm not the Sovereign, I can spend time with you and Mommy. Valeria thought about it seriously and nodded. We can be together from now on. Stephen smiled at her. That's right. Kim sighed as she listened to their conversation. A few days later, the Cassidy family sent someone to invite Kim to a celebration. Tyrell Fallon was a member of the Empyrean Circle, and he was from the Fallon family. After the Empyrean Circle had become famous, the Leviathan unit had given them time off to go home and spend time with their families. This was their tactic to win the 10 of them over. When the Cassidy family found out that Tyrell would be coming home, they couldn't pass up the opportunity to assist in preparing the celebration. Ron had asked them to invite Kim's family over. Tyrell was Wayne's nephew. After Eden died, Wayne decided to let Ron adopt Tyrell as his son. Tyrell was a talented martial artist like Eden, and Stephen had chosen him to become a member of the Empyrean Circle. Ron had invited Kim's family because he wanted to hold his head high in front of Stephen. He'd become a laughingstock after word spread among the aristocratic families that he'd forced Stephen to take Eden's place in the vanguard. He planned to restore his reputation by holding a high-profile celebration to welcome Tyrell home. The upper-class families of Washington, D.C. paid a visit to the Cassidy family to congratulate Tyrell. Their residence was bustling with guests. An endless stream of people came to deliver gifts. There were so many of them that they took up the entire street. As Tyrell's foster father, Ron had long forgotten about the pain of losing Eden and welcomed all the guests with great enthusiasm. The Cassidy family also lined up to welcome them. Stephen and Kim were part of the group as well. "Did you see that, Stephen?" Harry asked proudly. "Our Cassidy and Fallon families are rising in popularity every day, but you're just an ordinary person." "When you were the commander, you acted like you were above everybody else," Rebecca said. "But there's always someone better." Rome joined in. "Do you know what I hate the most? People who pretend like they're all that. You're always so confident, even when you're in front of the Fallon family. I don't understand where you get the courage from. Take a good look around you. A member of the Empyrean Circle is part of the Fallon family. You have no right to look down on them." Ron was busy exchanging pleasantries with the guests, but he overheard their mockery and threw a smug look at Stephen. Stephen ignored them. If this were 1 year ago, he would have argued with them. But now he'd returned to an ordinary life. All he wanted was for his family to live in peace. He didn't want to stir up trouble, because it would affect Kim and Valeria. As long as the Cassidy family didn't go too far, he could pretend they didn't exist. "What's wrong?" Rebecca provoked. "Are you not saying anything because you know it's true? At least you know your limits. Your era is over. The new era belongs to the Empyrean Circle." At that moment, the butler announced Tyrell's arrival. No one paid any more attention to Stephen. Tyrell was the main character of today's event. A huge crowd was at the entrance. Everyone was looking forward to seeing one of the Empyrean Circle members up close. The Fallon family had decorated the path from the main entrance of the Cassidy family's residence to the street across. Banners fluttered on both sides of the road. When Tyrell appeared, the entire Fallon family was in an uproar. The Cassidy family cheered alongside them. Tyrell donned a white uniform with his coat fluttering in the wind, looking heroic and valiant. The cheers grew louder with every step he took. Ron was immensely satisfied with the reception of his adoptive son. Because of Tyrell's achievements, no one among the aristocratic families dared to mock Ron about the past incident anymore. Tyrell strode towards the crowd. At first, he was walking in Ron's direction, but then he suddenly saw Stephen standing at the side. He abruptly changed direction and walked toward him instead. The crowd looked at Stephen in surprise. Tyrell's unusual behavior caused everyone to speculate. Was he planning to settle the score with Stephen? If one thought about it, it did make sense. Even though Tyrell wasn't Ron's biological son, he was now his adoptive son. And when Eden was alive, they'd been good friends. It wouldn't be strange if the first thing Tyrell did when he came home was to avenge his cousin. Most of the crowd had come to this conclusion, and Kim was no exception. She was beginning to worry when she saw Tyrell walking over aggressively. Tyrell was a member of the Empyrean Circle after all. If he wanted to hold Stephen accountable for Eden's death, he might not be able to retaliate. Kim held Stephen's wrist, prepared to pull him behind her and use her status in the Fallon family to protect him if needed. Stephen patted her hand and gave her a reassuring smile, signaling that everything would be fine. Tyrell walked straight to Stephen and was about to greet him politely when he was interrupted. "I'm a civilian. There's no need to go overboard. Stephen's words were vague, but Tyrell immediately understood. He came back to his senses and nodded. Even if you're a civilian, I'll never forget you. Tyrell's words were also vague, but it was enough to express his respect towards Stephen. What he meant was that Stephen had taught him everything he knew, and he would respect him as his teacher for the rest of his life. However, the meaning behind Tyrell's words were misconstrued when outsiders heard them. The Cassidy family misunderstood and thought that Tyrell was threatening to beat Stephen up to make him remember that Eden had died because of him. Harry, Rebecca, and Rome whispered to each other. It's a shame that there's a crowd today. It's not convenient for Mr. Tyrell to lay a hand on someone in public. If it were just us, Stephen would have been beaten black and blue. Who cares if he can't do it today? He just needs to wait for the right time. Mr. Tyrell can deal with him whenever he wants, anyway. Tyrell looked at Kim. He'd also been planning to greet her politely, but he gave up on the idea when he thought about Stephen's words. Instead, he turned to Valeria and smiled. She's so cute. Is this your daughter, Miss Kim? Above all else, Tyrell was an aristocrat, and he was a member of the Fallon family. For most of his life, he'd focused on cultivating his martial arts. He'd heard that Kim and Valeria held a prestigious position in the family, but this was his first time meeting them. Yes, this is Valeria. It's a pleasure to meet you. Valeria, say hello to Mr. Tyrell. Tyrell was taken aback. No, that's not necessary. Just call me Tyrell. She can think of me as her older brother. Tyrell was more than a decade older than Valeria, but as Stephen's student, he could technically be considered her older brother. But it definitely wouldn't be appropriate if his teacher's daughter addressed him with honorifics. Valeria smiled brightly and waved. Hello, Tyrell. She was so adorable that Tyrell's heart melted. Helen was displeased. Kim, you need to teach your daughter proper manners. Otherwise, when she grows up, people will say she's uncultured. It's fine, Tyrell said. I'm still young. I feel old when everyone calls me Mr. all the time. I'd love for Valeria to call me by my name. Since Tyrell had made it clear that it didn't matter one way or another, Helen didn't say anything else. At this time, the other 9 members of the Empyrean Circle were also on their way home. They received a grand reception like Tyrell. By announcing the Empyrean Circle's return home, the Leviathan unit had won their favor and spread their influence to the countries overseas. The whole world now knew that aside from the Sovereign, the U.S. also had the Empyrean Circle on their side. Anyone who planned to plot against them had to think twice. The country wouldn't be at a loss even if it was revealed that the Sovereign had retired. As the Leviathan unit had predicted, the world was drawn to the Empyrean Circle. Stephen was the leader of the aristocrats, and he'd carefully selected 10 members among the families to train and cultivate their martial arts. The 10 of them were talented to begin with, and with a teacher like Stephen, it was hard for them not to stand out. In Warhawk, Adler Robinson was monitoring the recent news from his mansion. He was so angry at the United States' success that he instructed his subordinate to prepare a helicopter for him. He had to meet those idiots from Vindictus and tell them off face to face. At an island affiliated with Warhawk, a cluster of helicopters circled the skies, guarding Adler's helicopter in the middle. When he stepped out, he headed straight for the largest mansion on the island. Odin, Gwen, and Luther had heard that Adler would be coming. They were already waiting at the entrance. When he arrived, they greeted him and welcomed him inside. From their tone, it sounded like they already considered this island to be their own territory. Adler ignored their greetings and went into the mansion. Odin, Gwen, and Luther followed him inside. Adler didn't wait for them to speak. He swept the newspaper off the coffee table in a fit of rage. You're staying here without a care in the world. Read the news. The 3 of them glanced at the newspapers on the floor. Every headline promoted the Empyrean Circle. Odin knew right away that Adler was here to criticize them. Sure enough, he hurled a string of curses at them. Do you know how much manpower and resources I've invested in you? But what was the result? The Sovereign is alive and Vito is dead. Is this how your organization handles things? Odin couldn't blame him for being angry. Adler had agreed to all of their requests and given him full support. He didn't hold anything back. He didn't even hesitate to use his influence to give them their own territory and new identities. But what happened in the end? The U.S. had only gotten stronger. Why aren't you three saying anything? Are you mute? You're more useless than a guard dog. At least they're useful. But what about you three? Besides wasting oxygen and food, what other uses do you have? It's our fault, Odin apologized. We failed to meet your expectations. What's the use in saying this now? Open your eyes and take a look. The U.S. doesn't just have the Sovereign. They have the Empyrean Circle. Even Warhawk can't threaten them now. Who knows when they'll overtake our country? As if to prove his point, Adler kicked the coffee table. Odin tried to appease him by kneeling with Gwen and Luther. Please calm down. You idiots caused this mess, so take care of it on your own. I don't care what you have to do. I need to see the U.S. lose. That won't be easy, Odin said hesitantly. Only someone like Vito has the strength to threaten them. And with the Empyrean Circle on their side, it's even more difficult than before. I don't want to hear your complaints. If you can't do it, then I'll take back everything I gave you, including this island and your new identities. I'm the one who gave them to you, so I can take them back whenever I want. Adler was glaring at Odin, Gwen, and Luther like he was in control, but in reality, he was also out of options. The U.S. was unstoppable. He had no choice but to threaten Vindictus. Even if they couldn't ruin the country, they could at least tarnish their reputation. Odin couldn't give up their luxurious life. He quickly agreed to Adler's demands. We'll do it. Good. If you fail one more time, I'll take everything back. Oh, and to make you more motivated, I'll set a deadline. I'll give you 7 days to take care of it. Odin didn't see how that would be possible, but he could only nod and say, okay. As he was agreeing, an idea came to him. Adler didn't notice the smirk on Odin's face. I'll come back in 7 days. Wait a minute, Odin called out. I'd like to ask you to monitor our operation. Adler turned around, confused. Like you said, motivation comes with pressure. With you personally supervising our operation, we'll be more determined than ever. It'll help our organization succeed. Besides, don't you want to see the United States' downfall for yourself? Do you already have a plan in mind? Yes, we do. Adler lit up. Okay, I don't know what you plan to do, but since you're so confident, I'll see it through with you. I'll stay on the island for the time being. Odin's decision left Gwen, Luther, and the other members of the organization puzzled. No one wanted to be micromanaged. When they confronted Odin after Adler left, he simply told them, be patient. We're sure to succeed this time, you'll see. A few days later, Kim, Steven, and Valeria were at the amusement park in Los Angeles. Kim and Valeria were in line, waiting to ride the Ferris wheel. When Steven joined them later, Valeria said she was thirsty, so Kim had handed her to him and left to buy a bottle of water. When she came back, she saw a red-haired young man in shades yelling at Steven for cutting the line. He was an employee at the amusement park, and he was threatening to call security to drag Steven away because he was insisting that he hadn't cut the line. Kim hurried over and stepped between them. What's going on here? Are you his wife? Perfect timing. Your husband cut in line with your daughter. No, he didn't. We've been here since the beginning. I left for a few minutes and just came back. The man frowned. Are you implying that I'm lying? I clearly remember he wasn't here 5 minutes ago. It had been a long time since Kim had spent time together with Steven and Valeria as a family. She couldn't be bothered with petty arguments. She wanted to get rid of this man as soon as possible so they could go back on their trip. You said you're an employee at this amusement park? I don't think you belong here. What, you want to fire me? You're just a nobody. What can you do? Kim took out her phone, sent a message, and then put it away. Just wait 10 minutes. I'm going to buy all the shares of this amusement park. The man was somewhat afraid of the warning look in her eyes. She seemed like someone who would follow through with her threats. This amusement park was worth $30 billion. When he thought about it, he realized that there were only a handful of people in Los Angeles who could casually drop that much money at a moment's notice. From what he could remember, a woman wasn't one of them. Moreover, why would someone that rich come to an amusement park like this? Taking all of this into consideration, the man concluded that this woman was bluffing. "Stop pretending. You don't have that much money." "Like I said, just wait patiently. You'll have your answer in 10 minutes. Kim turned to Stephen. "Don't worry, I'll take care of this." Stephen leaned closer and whispered teasingly, "Okay, do you want a kiss as a thank you?" Kim felt her face flush when his breath tickled her ear. "We're in public." "So?" Stephen leaned in for a kiss, but Kim sidestepped him. He laughed and wrapped his arms around her waist. He pressed a kiss to her cheek instead. The man seethed with anger when they blatantly ignored him and started flirting with each other. He would make sure to make them regret it in 10 minutes. When the time was up, he didn't bother keeping up appearances. "It's been 10 minutes. What happened to buying all the shares? I knew you were just talking big. If you apologize, I might forgive you." The commotion had attracted a crowd. When the man seemed confident that he had won, the spectators snickered and criticized Kim. What does she think she's doing in public? Isn't she embarrassed acting like that in front of her daughter? All she needs to do is apologize. Maybe that employee will be kind enough to let her family off. Kim stared the man down. Her gaze was unnerving and threatening. "I'll give you a chance. Apologize to my husband. If not, you'll have to deal with the consequences." Her insistence gave the man a bad feeling. Did she really have the money to buy the shares? But he'd gone this far. He couldn't back down now. "Your family is at fault. Why should I apologize?" "Okay, don't blame me for not giving you a chance. You're the one who didn't take it." The man's phone rang. He sneered as he picked up the call. "It's the director. You're in for it now." But as he listened to what the director had to say, his smile froze. "You sold the amusement park? Why? It's profitable." "What? You sold it for $40 billion?" The color drained from the man's face, and his jaw dropped when the director told him that the person who bought the amusement park was the CEO of the Wyvern Group. The CEO was a woman, her surname was Cassidy, and she was standing right in front of him. His hand trembled, and the phone slipped from his grasp. He knew he was finished. $40 billion is nothing to our family," Kim said casually. She ignored him and turned to the staff. The man was their superior, and he'd instructed them not to show them the security footage, because he'd claimed what he'd seen happened with his own eyes. "Can you let us see the security footage now?" The staff hurriedly pulled up the footage on her phone and held it out to Kim. The video showed Kim handing Valeria to Stephen when he returned before she left the line. Kim glared at the crowd that had been mocking her and Stephen. "This is the evidence. We didn't cut in line. What else do you have to say?" The crowd turned around and started mocking the man instead. "I knew he was lying. His eyes looked sketchy. He didn't seem like a good person when I first saw him." "That woman's family never cut in line. We misunderstood them. It's that employee's fault. He made us wrongly accuse her." The security guards arrived and asked for an explanation. Before Kim could explain, the crowd pointed out the despicable employee and accused him of starting trouble with an innocent family. They dragged him off for questioning. "Do you still want to ride the Ferris wheel?" Stephen asked when the issue was resolved. "After all that, I'm not in the mood," Kim said. "Let's check out the other rides." Valeria blinked up at them. "But I want to ride." Stephen carried her in his arms and flashed Kim a triumphant smile. Kim sighed. "I can't win when you two team up against me. Let's go." Valeria beamed and waved her arms excitedly. The three of them boarded the Ferris wheel. While Stephen was spending time with his family, Tyrell had gone back to his post. He encountered a plane wreckage near the border and instructed 2 Leviathan unit members to investigate the identity of the deceased. They got to work and compared the identities with the information on the data network. The 2 members reported their findings to Tyrell. According to the logo on the outer layer of the plane, it should be a private jet from the Robinson family in Warhawk.